Margaret had always loved quiet afternoons. Her small house stood at the edge of a maple-lined street in Vermont, where the air always smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. The sun filtered gently through the kitchen window as she kneaded pie dough, humming an old song she couldn't quite remember. It was her way of keeping busy, filling her home with warmth, scents, and the faint echoes of a time when laughter used to fill those same rooms. Her husband had passed away years ago, and since then, her days followed a steady rhythm of small tasks and small joys. She was slicing apples when she heard a knock on the door. It was sudden, unexpected, and she almost ignored it at first. But when she wiped her hands and opened it, her surprise froze into a smile. Standing there was David, her best friend Helen's son. She hadn't seen him properly in years, since he went off to college. Now he stood taller, older, more confident, with that same easy grin that used to charm everyone when he was little. "David," she said, astonished but happy. "Goodness, look at you. You've grown into your father's height." David laughed. "And maybe your cooking's what made me grow so much, Mrs. Parker. Mom always said you were the best cook she ever met. She told me if I was ever near your town, I had to stop by." Margaret felt a warm rush in her chest. "Well, that sounds just like Helen," she said, ushering him in. "Come on, sit down. I was just making pie. You came at the right time." The house was cozy and smelled of cinnamon and butter. David took a seat at the kitchen table, glancing around with a nostalgic smile. "I remember this place," he said. "You had that same clock back then and those sunflowers on the windowsill." Margaret smiled softly. "Some things don't change, dear. Though I can't say the same for the people who come through that door." David chuckled, resting his elbows on the table. "You mean we all got older?" "Older, yes," she replied, "but wiser. I hope." They chatted as she worked. He told her about his job in Boston, how hectic city life could be, and how he missed homemade meals. She listened with genuine warmth, nodding as she rolled the dough and layered it over the pie dish. Every once in a while she'd glance at him's familiar mannerisms, his gentle smile, and it reminded her of when he and his mother would visit on summer weekends. Back then, he was just a boy running through her garden, laughing with jam-stained hands. Now he was a grown man sitting across from her, kind and thoughtful, yet carrying that same spark of youth. The oven timer buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She slid the pie inside, wiped her hands, and poured tea for both of them. "Tell me," she asked, "how's your mother?" "Still keeping her roses alive." David grinned. "Barely. She says every year she'll get better, and every year they give up on her halfway through summer. I think she misses you, though. Says she hasn't had a real friend to talk to since you moved away." Margaret's smile dimmed slightly. "I miss her too," she admitted softly. "We used to talk every day. Life gets busy, doesn't it? People drift." He nodded, his expression tender. "That's why I wanted to stop by. To say hello. I know Mom would have come if she could, but she's with my sister this week." "That was kind of you," she said sincerely. "It means more than you know." As the pie baked, the afternoon light dimmed, turning golden, then amber. They talked more freely now about memories, family, and the little things that make life feel whole. When the lights flickered suddenly, Margaret frowned. The next second, the house went completely dark. The power was out. "Well," she said with a little laugh, "seems the universe wants us to have an early evening." David chuckled. "Guess we'll have to make do with candles." She reached into a drawer and pulled out 2 tall candles, lighting them with careful hands. The soft glow filled the kitchen, wrapping everything in a warm, gentle light. It made the space feel smaller, cozier, as if time itself had slowed down. The pie was ready soon after, its golden crust shimmering faintly in the flicker of candlelight. "Now," she said, slicing a piece and placing it on a plate, "you have to try this and tell me if I've still got it." David took a bite, his expression shifting from curiosity to delight. "Oh, wow," he said between chews. "Mrs. Parker, this is unreal. Better than I remember. It's sweet, but not too much. Perfect." Margaret laughed softly. "Good to know I haven't lost my touch." Helen used to say my pies could fix any argument. She's probably right, he said with a grin. I'd forgive anyone if they handed me this. They both laughed, and for a moment, everything felt light again. But beneath the laughter, something deeper stirred a quiet connection neither expected. It wasn't romance or longing, just two people finding comfort and shared warmth, bridging years of distance through conversation, kindness, and the simple act of breaking bread together after a pause. David looked around, studying the soft glow of the room. You know, this feels nice, he said thoughtfully. Peaceful. My apartment's never like this. Always noise, lights, traffic. I think I forgot what quiet feels like. Margaret's gaze softened. Quiet can be beautiful, she said gently, but it can be lonely too. It depends on what fills it. He nodded slowly, understanding her more than she expected. You live here alone? He asked carefully. Yes, she said, her tone steady. Since my husband passed. It's not always easy, but I manage. The house keeps me busy, and so does baking. He smiled kindly. You should open a bakery. Seriously, you'd have a line around the block. She laughed, the sound light and genuine. Oh no, I'm too old for that kind of chaos. I bake for peace, not profit. Then at least teach me how to make this pie, he said. I want to surprise Mom with it next time I visit. Margaret's heart warmed at the request. All right, she agreed. But you'll have to come back next weekend. I'll make sure we have everything ready. It's a deal, he said, smiling. The power came back on a few minutes later, the lights flickering before steadying again. The candles still burned between them, their glow fading gently under the brightness of the bulbs. David glanced at the clock. I should get going, he said reluctantly. Didn't realize how late it got. Margaret nodded, feeling an unexpected pang of disappointment. Drive safe, she said, walking him to the door as he reached for the handle. He turned back, his tone softer. Thank you, Mrs. Parker, for the pie and the company. I really needed a night like this. She smiled faintly. You're always welcome here, David, anytime. When the door closed behind him, the house felt quieter than before, not heavy, but still. The faint scent of cinnamon hung in the air, and the candle flame flickered one last time before going out. Margaret stood for a moment, her hands still warm from baking, her heart unexpectedly full. It had been a long time since she'd shared an evening like that with laughter, stories, and a reminder of what simple human connection could feel like. She hadn't realized how much she missed being part of someone's world. Even for a few hours. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn. Margaret looked out the window and smiled to herself. She didn't know it yet, but that small visit, the knock on the door, the shared meal, the gentle conversation was the start of something meaningful. It wasn't love or longing, but something purer. The quiet understanding between two people who had both been a little lonely and who, for one evening, filled that emptiness with warmth, kindness, and the taste of homemade pie. As she blew out the last candle, the thought crossed her mind. Sometimes, life brings people together not by grand design, but by small moments that matter more than we realize. And in that soft, flickering light, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years, quiet joy that came from being seen, heard, and remembered. The next morning, Margaret woke to sunlight streaming through her kitchen window. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as she set a small pot on the table. The quiet of the house felt comforting, but her thoughts kept drifting back to David's visit the night before. There was something about his presence, something warm and familiar that lingered in the corners of her mind. She shook her head slightly, smiling to herself. It had been years since she felt such a connection, even if it was just for a short evening. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed on the counter. Seeing David's name on the screen made her heart skip a beat. She answered quickly, her voice calm but excited. "Good morning, David." "Morning, Mrs. Parker," he replied, his tone casual yet friendly. "I was thinking, since I missed a lot of time yesterday catching up, Would you mind if I came by again this afternoon? I brought some things for you, small gifts from Boston. Margaret's smile widened. That's very thoughtful of you. I'd be happy to see you again. Come by around 3. Perfect. I'll see you then. After hanging up, Margaret felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. She tidied the house, arranged fresh flowers on the table, and even baked a batch of scones. It was a small gesture, but she wanted the afternoon to feel welcoming. There was something special about David's visits, something she hadn't realized she missed so much. When the doorbell rang, Margaret opened it to find David holding a small box and a bright smile. I brought you a few things, he said, handing her the gifts. Nothing big, just something to remember Boston by. Margaret accepted them graciously. Inside the box were small, thoughtful items, a hand-carved wooden ornament, a tin of local tea, and a framed photograph of a park they had visited years ago. She felt touched by the gesture. David, these are lovely. Thank you. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. You've always been kind to me. I thought it was time I returned the favor in a way. They moved to the kitchen where Margaret had set a small table. The sunlight now poured fully into the room, casting a warm glow over the tea and scones. As they settled, David opened up about his life in the city, his job, the people he worked with, and the challenges he faced. Margaret listened intently, offering advice and encouragement where she could, enjoying the ease of conversation. At one point, David paused, looking a bit hesitant. You know, I really appreciate how welcoming you've always been, he said quietly. Even as a kid and now, it's comforting to be here. Like I'm not just another visitor. Margaret felt a pang of emotion. David, you'll always be welcome here. It's nice to share these moments with someone who appreciates them. You make it easy to enjoy life again. They laughed together, sharing stories from the past, stories that seemed both distant and immediate at the same time. David recounted memories of school days, summer trips, and small adventures they had shared. Margaret added her own recollections, and together they painted a picture of years gone by, yet still alive in their memories. As the afternoon wore on, a sudden rainstorm began outside, tapping lightly against the windows. The cozy atmosphere inside became even more pronounced. David remarked on how comforting the space felt. The warmth of the home and the gentle flicker of the sunlight through rain-speckled glass. Margaret smiled at his observation, silently agreeing. Then, unexpectedly, David hesitated, his expression shifting. Mrs. Parker, would you like to go for a walk? The rain isn't heavy, and there's a path near the house I think you'd enjoy. Margaret blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. She hadn't expected to leave the warmth of the kitchen, but something in his voice invited her trust. All right, she said after a moment. Just a short walk, though. I wouldn't want to get soaked. They stepped outside, the rain light and refreshing. David handed her an umbrella, holding another for himself. As they walked along the wet path, the air smelled of earth and rain, and the leaves glistened like tiny gems. Conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from casual topics to deeper reflections. They spoke about dreams, fears, and the quiet regrets that sometimes lingered in life. Margaret realized how rare it was to feel this level of ease with someone. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, but it carried a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding, and respect. David listened to her thoughts with genuine attention, and in turn, she found herself fully engaged with his words. As the path curved, they came across a small bench under a large oak tree. They sat together, watching raindrops fall and hearing the distant sound of birds sheltering from the storm. I never realized how peaceful this area is, David said softly. It's different from the city. I think I needed this more than I knew. Margaret nodded. It's easy to forget the simple joys when life gets busy. Moments like this remind us what matters. There was a comfortable silence filled only by the sound of the rain and their breathing. Then David's expression shifted slightly, and he looked at her with curiosity. Mrs. Parker, Can I ask something personal? Of course, she replied gently. He hesitated. You always seem so composed. Have you ever felt lonely in all these years? Margaret's gaze softened. Lonely, but not empty. I've learned to fill my life with things I love, baking, memories, friends. But evenings, like this, remind me that companionship matters too, even if just for a short while. David smiled, understanding her more deeply than words could convey. I think I get that, he said. I've spent so much time running, working, trying to keep everything together. But maybe what I really need is to just be present sometimes, like now. They sat in silence a moment longer, the rain easing into a drizzle. Margaret realized that this visit this afternoon was more than casual catching up. It was a shared recognition of human connection, of the small gestures and simple pleasures that give life meaning. She felt grateful for David's presence, for his thoughtful attention, and for the ease with which they could communicate. When the rain stopped completely, they made their way back to the house. Inside, Margaret set the kettle on the stove for another round of tea. David leaned against the counter, watching her move with quiet appreciation. You really have a gift for making people feel welcome, he said. It's easy when the company is this pleasant, Margaret replied, smiling as they sat drinking tea. The conversation took a lighter turn. They spoke about movies, books, and music, everything that brought joy into their lives. David's laughter filled the kitchen, blending with the soft clinking of cups and spoons. Margaret realized how refreshing it was to feel this lively energy. In her home again, how rejuvenating it was to engage with someone who valued presence over pretense. Suddenly, David glanced at the clock and frowned. I didn't realize how long I'd stayed. I should head back soon. Margaret felt a twinge of disappointment, but kept her voice calm. You're always welcome, David. Take your time and come back whenever you like. He smiled warmly. I will. And I promise I'll bring more stories next time. Maybe even bake something with you, too. Margaret's heart lifted at his words. I'd like that very much. As he gathered his things to leave, there was a pause at the door. David turned back, his eyes reflecting sincere gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. I don't know if you realize it, but these visits, they mean a lot to me, more than I can say. Margaret felt a lump in her throat. And to me, David, more than you know. When he left, the house felt quiet once again. But unlike the morning, this quiet wasn't empty. It was filled with the lingering warmth of conversation, shared laughter, and the subtle understanding that sometimes human connection comes in small, unexpected ways. Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose, a realization that life could still surprise her with moments of joy and companionship. Even in the simple act of hosting a friend's son for an afternoon, she walked to the kitchen window, watching the leaves glisten under the post-storm sunlight. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a deep, contented peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. The simple act of sharing time with someone who truly listened had brought her more happiness than she expected. And somewhere in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of something meaningful, an ongoing bond built on respect, care, and the quiet joy of being present together. The following day, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about David's visit. Even the familiar hum of her daily routine seemed different, infused with a subtle warmth she hadn't felt in years. As she tidied the house, arranged fresh flowers, and brewed her morning coffee, her mind replayed the laughter, the conversations, and the quiet moments on the rainy path. She realized how rare it was to find someone with whom time seemed to both fly and linger. A person whose presence made ordinary moments feel significant. By mid-afternoon, she heard the doorbell again. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door to find David standing there, holding a small brown paper bag and a tentative smile. I thought I could come by again, he said. I brought something you might like. Margaret laughed softly, warmth spreading through her chest. I'm glad you did. Come in, let's put the tea on. Inside, the house smelled inviting. the fresh scent of flowers blending with the earthy aroma of the rain from yesterday. David placed the bag on the counter. Inside were small but thoughtful items: a handwritten card, Kay a packet of seeds for her garden, and a book she had once mentioned wanting to read. Margaret's eyes softened as she looked at the gifts. "David, this is wonderful." "Thank you. You really didn't need to." "I wanted to," he said simply, his gaze meeting hers with a sincerity that made her heart lift. "I've been thinking about yesterday, and I realized I wanted to spend more time here. Not because I have to, but because I enjoy it." They moved to the kitchen table where sunlight poured through the window. Margaret served tea and small scones she had baked that morning. And for a while, they simply enjoyed each other's company. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on lighthearted topics: books, movies, old memories, but gradually it shifted toward more personal reflections. David shared stories about his work and the pressures he faced, his voice tinged with both pride and exhaustion. Margaret listened carefully, offering quiet encouragement. "It's admirable how dedicated you are," she said. "But don't forget to care for yourself. Even the strongest need moments to breathe." David nodded, taking her words seriously. "I know. That's why I wanted to come here. To step away from the city noise, to think clearly, to just be." Margaret felt a pang of recognition. Life, even when filled with accomplishments, often left people feeling isolated. Yet here in this simple kitchen, they found solace in one another's presence. It wasn't romance in the conventional sense, but it was an intimacy born of shared understanding, of mutual respect, of quiet companionship. As the afternoon stretched on, the light shifted, casting long shadows across the room. Margaret suggested they step outside for a walk in the garden. David agreed, and together they moved through the soft grass. Breathing in the scent of flowers and the earthy freshness of post-rain air, they paused near the small fountain she had installed last summer. Water trickled softly, providing a gentle soundtrack to their conversation. "I never realized how much I missed this," David said. "Not just the garden, but being able to relax, to feel grounded. Life in the city makes you forget these simple joys." Margaret smiled. Sometimes it takes stepping outside the routine to remember what really matters. It's the little things: the warmth of sunlight, the sound of water, the company of someone who listens, that make life meaningful. David looked at her, appreciation in his eyes. "You've always had a way of making people feel understood. Even when I was younger, I felt that. And now, it's comforting to feel it again." Margaret's heart warmed at his words. She realized that this connection, this quiet bond, was something rare and precious. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, the kind that left a lasting impression without needing grand gestures. They continued to walk, sharing memories and laughter, until the sky began to change with the approach of evening. The fading light turned the garden golden, the colors of flowers and leaves deepening in the soft glow. David paused, looking around with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I think this might be the most peaceful place I've been in a long time. Not just because it's beautiful, but because it feels safe, honest, real." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "I'm glad, David. That's exactly what I hope people feel here. That life, even with its challenges, can still offer moments of clarity and comfort." For a while they sat quietly on a garden bench, simply observing the fading light and enjoying the shared calm. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a mutual acknowledgement of the importance of this connection. Neither needed to fill it with words. The presence of one another was enough. As twilight approached, David glanced at the clock and sighed. "I should head back soon," he said reluctantly. Margaret nodded, understanding yet feeling a twinge of disappointment. "Of course. But you're always welcome here, David. Anytime you need a break from the city, or just a quiet afternoon, you know where to come." He smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. I think I'll be taking you up on that offer more often." Inside, they poured one last cup of tea. Conversation returned briefly to lighter topics: books, movies, small anecdotes, but underneath it all, there was a shared understanding, an unspoken recognition that these moments mattered more than casual chatter ever could. Finally, David gathered his things to leave. He paused at the door, looking back with genuine affection. "This has been more meaningful than I expected," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much I needed this. Thank you for letting me be a part of your life, even in such small ways." Margaret smiled, her heart full. "And thank you, David. Your visits remind me that life can still surprise us with joy, with friendship, and with moments that touch the heart." He left, and Margaret closed the door, feeling the quiet of the house wrap around her. But unlike before, this quiet was comforting, filled with the echoes of laughter, conversation, and shared presence. She felt a renewed sense of life, a quiet excitement for future afternoons like this, where the simple act of sharing time with someone she valued brought unexpected happiness. Margaret sat by the window, watching the last light fade over the garden. She realized that connection, honest, caring, patient, was one of life's greatest gifts. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the small moments: shared tea, laughter, thoughtful conversation, and the gentle reassurance that someone else understood and cared in the days and weeks that followed. David's visits became a cherished routine. Each time he arrived, the house felt alive with conversation, warmth, and mutual respect. Margaret found herself looking forward to these afternoons with a joy that went beyond mere company. And David, in turn, found a rare comfort and grounding he hadn't known he was missing. Through these visits, Margaret rediscovered a part of herself she hadn't realized had been dormant: the ability to connect deeply, to share joy without fear or hesitation, and to appreciate the quiet power of companionship. It was a gentle, mature kind of connection, one that enriched their lives without needing to cross boundaries. Without overt romance, but filled with emotional depth and meaningful interaction. As the sun set, Margaret felt a quiet gratitude. Life had offered her an unexpected gift: a young man who reminded her of the beauty of human connection, of the comfort in shared presence, and of the subtle ways hearts can touch without grand gestures or dramatic events. She poured herself another cup of tea and settled into the chair by the window, reflecting on how life sometimes surprised you when you least expected it. With David's visits, she had found something profoundly simple yet deeply moving: the joy of being understood, of sharing time with someone who truly listened, and of realizing that meaningful connections could appear when you opened your heart to them. That evening, as the house grew quiet, Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. It was a peace born not of solitude, but of connection. Not of grand adventures, but of small, heartfelt moments that made life rich and full. And in her heart, she knew this bond built on trust, respect, and genuine care was something she would treasure for a lifetime.